Good morning from Vietnam, Shonna. Thanks a lot for being so kind and generous to join our Inside Sharing show and share your stories with our audience. And on behalf of the listeners around the world, we want to say thank you to you.
Oh, thank you for having me, and good morning.
Good morning to you. And Shonna, since you haven't been to Vietnam, please accept our invitation. So if you travel to this country, you let me know. I'll make sure that my family will be around to take you and your family around town, all right?
That's so gracious, and I will definitely do that. And it's yet one more reason to finally take that off my bucket list.
Wonderful, wonderful. And in our culture, Shona, it's a great honor for us to having you do a little introduction about who you are and the works that you are doing. Can you do that for us, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my name is Shonna Waters. I'm based out of Arlington, Virginia, in the United States, which is right outside of Washington, D.C.
Mm.
Born and raised, moved around a few times, but largely have always been here. I like to describe myself as a scientist practitioner. So I'm trained as an industrial organizational psychologist. I have my PhD in that subject. But what has really always gotten me excited is how to take all of the rigorous science and actually apply it to everyday problems and situations and lives to make a difference, to make an impact. So the way that I do that today is I wear a few hats. My primary hat is I am an executive at a technology company called BetterUp that provides digital coaching at scale across the enterprise. And then in my sort of spare time, so to speak, I also teach at Georgetown University. I am a coach, primarily doing pro bono coaching with emerging leaders. And then I also like to write. I've written 2 books to date, and periodically write book chapters and articles and things like that.
Wow, Shona, you have an amazing journey that you introduced to us in about a minute and then 20 seconds. So, in this conversation, we're gonna examine your journey together. Would you agree?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So, let's travel time. When I was young, I always wanted to become an astronaut. And wearing the suit, jumping in different planet, sounds so cool to me. But life didn't give me any opportunity doing anything close to what I wanted. Right? It took me to a very different path. I'm wonder, like what was your dream when you was young, Shana?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will refrain from asking you all the questions about going to space that are coming to mind for me. So I'll refrain, since you told me I'm supposed to focus on my story, but another time we'll have to put a placeholder in that. The first memory I have of a career ambition was that I wanted to be a zoologist. I wanted to work with mammals, with animals. And I still love animals, still fascinated with them. I now see some of the downsides of that. But what is funny to think about with that is, like, science has always been part of my love, my ambition. And so that evolved in many different ways. But that's where I started. And at some point in adolescence, I got really interested in the question of nature versus nurture.
Mm.
So the family that I was raised in had 4 children. 2 of them, my 2 oldest siblings, were adopted. And then I have 1 biological sister. And so I was just always really interested in this notion of, knowing that I was biologically related to some of my family members and not to others. And yet I would see that, my adopted sister was the most like my mom behaviorally and, habits and things like that. And I was just really curious about kind of contributions of that. And so it was a winding path to get there, but psychology ended up being where I landed there, but I took a path through molecular genetics.
Wow, wow. I'm curious about your curiosity back then in terms of nature versus nurture. So, what made you have that curiosity at that age, though?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and this is probably related to why I've always loved science, is,
Oh.
like all humans, I'm a natural observer. I do a lot of noticing and just observing patterns and, then wanting to understand and ask questions about that. And so I think spending the majority of my time in my house with my family, that was the place I started with just getting curious about that. But eventually, as I went into the world, I got curious about what makes companies tick and what makes school systems tick and things like that. So it extended, but it definitely started at home.
So, if we travel back in time, there was a lot of things that you can be curious about. There will be a lot of things that you could love doing, but science seems to be one of the things that going in throughout your life, right? Was there anyone in your family and anybody around you become a source of influence for you to take that path, though?
For sure. So my father also had a PhD,
Ah.
and his was technically in education, but he was really a psychometrician. So
Mm.
he um, did a lot of his doctoral work in educational testing and high stakes testing in general. Applied. He was in the Air Force in the United States, and so that's sort of where he started that career. But so in my house, science fairs. Do you have science fairs in Vietnam? Like
Uh,
when you're growing up in school?
no.
Okay, so the way a science fair works in the United States, anyways, is in school, starting, usually in elementary school, maybe age 7 or 8, things like that. Your teacher gives you an opportunity to choose a research project.
Ah.
And so you get to choose it. You pick the research question. They teach you the scientific method. And at the end of the class, you have the opportunity to create this big, it's essentially like a fancy poster board with your hypothesis and your methodology and your results and your conclusions. And you get to stand up in a big room and people walk around and you get to talk about your study.
Ah.
And they have competitions related to that and all of that. So it's kind of like an athletic event for budding scientists
Ah.
or children. And in my house, that was like the big event of the year. My dad, who usually worked a lot and traveled or whatever, suddenly became very present and got very involved in it. And so it was a way to get his attention and bond. And so like those are some of my earliest memories of spending time with my dad, was like, you know, testing water to see if the water was cleaner in my city or in Washington, D.C., and like just all of that, I think engaging with the scientific process. And so I just always thought it was really cool to be the first one to know the
Ah.
answer to the question. And then to be able to share that information with others and see them get curious about it and get excited. And so I think that's what spurred it for me.
Beautiful. Shona, I'm curious about uh, the nature versus nurture. In your case, which one between the two create the path that getting you to continue becoming scientist, like science practitioners, though?
Yeah, it was probably both.
Both.
There's probably something to the fact that, the funny story on my dad being in what turned out to be very similar field to the one I ended up in, is that I didn't actually understand that he had spent his life doing,
Mm.
something very similar to IO psychology. And I found that out when I went to tell him I had discovered this field and was about to change my major, right? So one could say that, like, well, I probably got interested in that because I had been exposed to a lot of it all through my life, the nurture part.
Mm.
Or you could argue that actually there was something in our shared DNA that led to him, being good at statistics and logic and things like that then apply to science and that I picked up too. But it's probably, the truth is probably in between. I think most of the behavioral genetics research says that it's a mix of nature and nurture.
So, and then when you started going to a university, science is very very big, and broad, right? And then you narrow it down to psychology, and get a PhD in that field also. Why that industry? Why that topic fascinated to you, Shonna?
Yeah, well, this is actually pretty interesting because um, when I started college, my major was actually more in biology. It was in molecular genetics, and I was interested in that because I was interested in, yeah, really sort of the DNA side, the nature side of that nature nurture question. And then I was studying molecular genetics at Penn State and took my first intro to psychology class as a requirement for my degree. And I totally got hooked. I fell in love. And what really attracted me to it was all of these things that like felt like I already knew them just from observing and working with people or whatever. There were experiments and really interesting experiments with great stories around them that like gave language to what I had been sensing naturally. And so people talk about psychology being common sense. And I think that's that, that natural appeal is like humans, we're just curious about ourselves and our species. And so I went in there and it just felt like I just wanted to keep learning more. I wanted to keep hearing more of these stories. So I ended up changing to a double major in psychology. But originally, the type of psychology I was interested was more like neuropsych. So still, about the brain, conducting PCR tests and things like that, and working with animal models of depression and things like that. But at the same time, I was paying to volunteer. Like I was essentially volunteering in labs to do that work while I was funding my life to be able to do that by working at Starbucks. And I started noticing that even though I was so much more like intellectually stimulated by the work in the lab, I looked forward to going to Starbucks more. And what it was interacting with people. I loved like seeing people light up when I remembered their order. I was really curious about the business side and, how do we decide how many employees to staff on a given shift? And there's one supervisor and some of the supervisors are really good and others are kind of a terrible experience. And what makes that different? And Starbucks had a really well-developed training program. Like I went to coffee college for 2 weeks, and I was really fascinated how in 2 weeks I could become an expert in espresso. And just like the scale of everything and the HR manuals, and so I started getting really curious about like who are the people that put that together. And I realized that there was this entire field called industrial organizational psychology that sort of brought these worlds together, psychology and what I was doing in the lab, but like business and HR and how to actually marry those things. So I basically, through Google, found my way there and found out that the school I was at the time, then University of Maryland, had a great program and I could take whole classes in it. So
and then you decided to go all the way to PhD for that also. Okay, tell us, why did you decide to go all in into PhD?
Yeah, well, so I mentioned that it wasn't until I told my dad that I wanted to change my major that he said, "Hey, that's what I do," right? And so it turned out that my dad was working for a company that did applied research in industrial organizational psychology. So it was a research-oriented consulting firm called Humro. And so when I told him that I wanted to change my major yet again, he said, wait, He made me do two things. First, he made me to take a battery of career assessments, like interest inventories and things like that. The second thing was he said, I'm gonna try to get you an internship at my company, and I want you to try it first to see if you like it. And so I had this, I was really lucky. I mean, I was doing grunt work. I was, stuffing envelopes, scanning surveys, things like that at first. But what it let me do was observe all the psychologists around me and learn like the work that they did. And I started just paying attention to like, who were the people that got to do the kinds of work I was really excited about? And they were generally the people with the PhDs. And so I started talking to those people, understanding why they went and got PhDs, how they did that, started reading a lot of journal articles, and said like, okay, what are the topics they get excited about? Where do those scholars study? Where do they teach? Where do they study? And ended up deciding that I was all in, and I only had 9 months between my finishing my undergraduate degree and going to get my PhD, but I did work the whole time through.
And then how has been your career after that? Been moving? Can you share that evolution with us?
Yeah, well, I stayed, as I mentioned, I worked all through undergraduate and graduate school, which was great for me because it kept me really motivated and helped me think about the topics I was learning and the research I was doing, like how to actually use it, and what types of questions, people and organizations what was actually important to them. But so after I finished my PhD, I continued working for that same company, Hummer. So I stayed the first 12 years of my career in external consulting. And I did everything from like educational research, military research, private sector research, job analyses, a lot of assessment development, like broad range of things. And then eventually, once I was ready to have my second child, I wanted to get out of the consulting world. And so I went and took a position internally in the United States government. And I did that for 5 years, starting out in their selection group, designing, high stakes assessments and things like that. And then eventually moving over into organizational effectiveness, where I really had the aha that, I had even assessment implementation projects were change management projects. And I had a lot of tools on how to help organizations get better, but I didn't have a lot of tools on how to like get really deep with a leader. And so many times the challenges in an organization also connect to challenges with a leader. And so I went to coach training there and became a certified coach. And then I went to the Society of Human Resource Management and led their research department. And really all the time kept thinking like, I want to go bigger. Like, how do I make a bigger impact? And so eventually that took me to technology because, I could write all the articles and books and things like that. But at the end of the day, if I really want science to be used, psychology to be used in people's everyday lives and at scale, best way to do that is through technology. So I joined BetterUp and have been there ever since.
And when I connect with you, Shonna, I was amazed by what you wrote in here. Is untapped potential is what fuels you, right? And that untapped potential is endless. So it's keep expanding. So I'm wondering, why you chose get into an area that is never had the ending. So it keeps you to continue the path of learning and growing. So tell us what motivates you, what inspires you from within.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm actually working with a coach myself right now, and she's a narrative coach. And one of the things that came up in that discussion is, when I think about the people in my life who have been most influential and inspiring, what was true about those relationships was it was this combination of support and challenge. And the support is like that ability to honor what is, like what you are today and everything that you bring with you, and to see the potential, like this limitless potential, and give you the confidence and like the awareness of what that is, and then challenge you to actually attain it, like to keep getting a little bit better every day. And it's this like duality of like you're a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time, and how do you like harness and support that in someone. And so for me, it's about like that being my view of myself, is trying to, you know, I'm a recovering perfectionist, but I think like where I am now, it's like, I think giving myself grace and compassion in all my failings, but also trying to, you know, take time to appreciate what I have been able to accomplish, and saying like, you know, what's next? How do I get like 1% better every day?
Wow. And what's interesting, what is so fascinating for you to stay in that technology space for that many years until now?
Yeah. Well, technology is fascinating because it's ever evolving. Like, you know, we all make predictions about what's gonna happen and what's coming down the road, but you know, our brains aren't good at thinking exponentially. So it's just really exciting to be in there on the cutting edge and, you know, helping to influence what's happening there. I've also really found a home in the like pace of technology. It's very fast moving in terms of, you know, timelines that in the government or consulting world would have been months, or like the expectations are weeks or days. And so that works well for someone with little patience like myself. And the people have been incredible. I think, you know, one of the things that's beautiful about a lot of startups is they're very mission driven, mission oriented. And so that really taps into my personal desire for purpose and meaning, and mattering, and feeling like I have community with others who care about the same things that I do. And because it's also fast moving and purpose driven, like in, you know, I've been at BetterUp for 5 years, and I can see real tangible impact of the time that I've spent there, and you know, decisions that I helped make. And so that feels really rewarding too. You know, I especially being a mother, like anytime away from my children, there's like a very tangible opportunity cost. And so feeling like that time is worth it by like making an impact on the world has been really important to me too.
Yeah. And Shonna, I believe in coaching also. So the coaching has been evolutions in the, you know, big evolution also. And digital coaching started to take place a couple of years ago, and it seems to will leading the way for the coaching practices. So where do you see the impact of digital coaching to leaders and organizations these days, though?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, the world is so complex right now, and ambiguous and rapidly changing and all of this, you know, and so I really think that coaching is an amazing tool that individuals and organizations can use to help us make sense of everything that's going on and deal with the stress, and you know, become more resilient, and you know, increase our focus and performance and all of those things, but really just be like better, happier, more grounded people. And if you can't pour from an empty cup, and so, you know, you know, whether it's through digital coaching or Brody and I, my co-author of my latest book, like we wrote the book, The Coaching Shift, because our belief is that if everybody showed up a little bit more coach-like, a little more curious, a little more open, a little less judgmental, that all of our interactions would just be more positive and the world would be a better place. And
Wow.
so I think digital coaching is a really powerful tool in that, because it just allows us to get something that used to be a very elite, scarce resource to a much broader scale.
And where do you see the digital coaching, the transformation of that? Because I believe that the technology will go to the next level and will bring the digital
Yes.
coaching to the next level also in terms of personalization, customization and stuff. So is there any exciting about the digital coaching that you foresee is going to happen in advance in the next couple of years now?
Yeah. I mean, my personal belief is that the infusion of technology into coaching over time will change the nature of what coaching is. So at the very beginning of the digital coaching revolution, it was really taking the traditional coaching modality and putting it, on a Zoom call or the equivalent of it. And it had other advantages too. By doing that, you could standardize the experience, create standard measures, collect more data, things like that. But as technology has continued to evolve, and we're collecting more data and conducting more research and all of that, we're able to leverage additional technology advancements to really start to tease apart, like, what are the things that, technology is great for pattern recognition, for example. Humans have limited cognitive load. So what are the places where we can actually marry or augment human delivered coaching with technology to make it more efficient, more effective, more, kind of standardized in terms of the quality of the experience, and democratize access so that it gets to more and more people. So there's been a lot of press lately about Chat GPT, for example. And so you could foresee a world where, I think some people talk about like coaching chatbots replacing humans. That's not my personal view, at least like in a holistic sense in the foreseeable future. But you could imagine, for example, like interacting with a coach or a chatbot before a coaching session to help prepare you and the coach for the session. Or even today, our platform uses AI to provide recommendations around resources and things like that, because it's kind of impossible for a human coach to know every resource out there and what's the perfect one to use in a particular situation. So I think it'll change everything in terms of like how coaching is delivered and what we know about who can most benefit from coaching and when and what type and matching and all of those things. But the biggest influence, I think, is going to really just be unlocking access.
Unlocking access. Wow. Shonna, I think that a lot of my clients in here also using BetterUp. So I think it's a huge congratulations to your organization and achievements that you guys are doing. And it's starting to not only apply to the leaders at the higher level, but it's starting to cascade out into the young talents and the managerial level also, for them to transform the way that they manage team onto the way that they lead their people and their organization. So so I want to go to the book that you wrote, The Coaching Shift, right? Because you mentioned about the coaching mindset and the coaching skill sets, right? And in this part of the world, the coaching is still in the very early stage also. So not like in the West, where it's quite mature. So and a lot of managers and leaders in here still use the old traditional, management and leadership practices. So a lot of that has proven to be outdated, and coaching seems to be the new way of to blending in to make us become more effective managers and leaders, right? So tell us, why did you decided to write the book, The Coaching Shift, though?
Well, so right after I went through coach training, I was given the opportunity to start teaching coaching skills to HR professionals at Georgetown University. And I was really excited about that because my experience of many HR teams was that they were very traditional, hierarchical. There was often just the sense of like, we develop the answers, the policies, we push them out. It's not much of a conversation, right? And so I was really excited about being able to use coaching as a way to infuse more understanding of psychology, because there's a human in human resources. And so I'd started teaching that class, but at the time there wasn't really, like, coaching wasn't as popular as it is now. There weren't a lot of books geared towards non-coaches. So there was a lot of like coaching books for coaches who were going to be professional coaches. But that was like coach as a noun and not a verb. And what I wanted was like, I want to teach HR professionals how to use it regardless of what task they're doing. So I pieced everything together with like journal articles and chapters from different places. And I used Michael Bungay-Stanier's book, The Coaching Habit. But it was hard. It was hard for the students. It was hard for me to organize. And so eventually I took on a colleague, co-professor, Brody Reardon, and she had written multiple books too. And we said, all right, one day we are going to write the book for this class. So our original audience was just for students. But during this time, and through my consulting with BetterUp and externally, like business leaders all the time, when they'd find out that I taught this class, they'd say, well, can I have the syllabus? Can you come and talk to our leaders or our managers about it? And so I just realized there was like a much broader audience or decision. And frankly, in my own experience, I use it as much with my kids as I do at work. Yeah. So we ended up saying, okay, we'll take the structure and what we've learned about teaching these skills to non-coaches from the class, but really we're going to make this book a book for anyone.
So if you pick one chapter in the book that you love most, okay, what would that chapter be and why is that?
That is a great question. What would be my favorite chapter? It's tricky because at the end of the day, I remain a psychologist. And so, the way that we structure the book is 3 sections. Your coaching skill set, and then your coaching impact. So, chapter 3 is about like your motivation and behavior. And so it's really getting into like, connecting people to their big why, understanding like why they do things, how to start to think about like what it is you want to accomplish and how to bridge that gap. So that's like very, very much psychology. So I love that. But I'm torn because chapter 7 is really about like our big thesis, which is, especially with a coaching mindset, like we think that's what it's going to take to solve a lot of the big challenges that the whole world is facing, like climate change and racism and sexism and like all of these things that I think are really barriers to a thriving society. And so that's another one that I like because it's like a little bit of a flip on how you apply.
Chapter 3 and chapter 7. Alrighty.
Yeah.
I remember that when I pay more attention within those 2 chapters.
Thank you. I know, it's like choosing between your children. You can't do it. It's not.
It's not fair asking that question. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
And Shonna, since you're the expert on that, you wrote the book, The Coaching Shift, right? And a lot of us, if we wanna transform, I believe also we need to build the mindset of coaching also. So I'm not there. I didn't know anything about coaching, and I start to have the baby steps toward building the mindset of coaching. Right? What should I do now? to get into that directions?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so my personal belief on this, and this is the philosophy that we carry through the book, that it starts with you. So I think getting really curious about yourself and just starting to notice. So as we start the class with our students each semester, we ask people to start by journaling. And ideally every day, no set format, no length, they never turn it in. But the idea is to just get into the habit of noticing. And so, I think that's where it starts is like, you can't change what you don't see. You can't ask questions without a stimulus or something there. So starting with yourself and really just starting to log, like, what's coming up for you? Okay, why that? Like getting, and so it's really starting to understand your own thinking, emotions, experiences, behaviors, patterns, energy, values, things like that. And as you start to get curious about that in yourself, you'll start to notice it in others too.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. I want to bring back one thing that you shared earlier, and that is quite, quite cool. You said that you was a recovering perfectionist. All
Yeah.
right. Would you mind to share that with us?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I've definitely, whether it was in school and wanting, to get an A, or, wanting a perfect performance review, or putting on makeup every day, or, it shows up in a million different ways. Being a neat freak, organizing things, like if I showed you right now, all of my books are organized by color, things like that. And I think that served me, honestly, like very well.
Yep.
For a long time. And, it gets rewarded. You get the A, you get the pat on the back, you get the recognition, the award, whatever that is, until it doesn't, until you realize that it's actually holding you back. It's holding you back from growing. It can be related to, if you're so worried about perfection, you're usually not being as bold as you could or taking the biggest chances because you don't want to fail. And so it ended up at some point becoming a real anchor for me and like holding me down as opposed to, lifting me up. And I think that started showing up in particular when I started leading teams and what holds people back from delegating, because they can't control it. If they can't control it, they can't be perfect at it. And, all of that stuff. And so I just got to a point where I had outgrown those habits of mind. And so I had to do a lot of work on that. And it's a work in progress. I'll probably never have perfected my non-perfectionism, but I work on it every day.
Wow. Shonna, I asked that question because there's a lot of people out there who's really, really good, but also becoming perfectionists themselves also. So like you share, what it helps them in certain way, but also hold them back and, for further growing. And you have prime example you share in your stories in here. So please share with us the practice that you took, that you are taking actually, so that to help you to be, to start to realize and start to recover from that though.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of different things I have tried, continue to try, but like one of the frameworks that's been really helpful for me is Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy have this framework called immunity to change. And so this is basically it's this idea that every time we have a goal, so in this case, my goal would be I want to let go of my perfectionism. The idea is that there's a hidden goal. So that's my stated goal. That's the one that I see, I want it. I believe deeply that I really want to let go of my perfectionism. But in fact, I have another goal, and that one's hidden from me most of the time. But it's the goal that like gets in the way of achieving my stated goal. And what that usually is with something like perfectionism is the belief that, you know, I want people to like me, and if I'm not perfect, I will be rejected. People won't like me, right? So I'm only worthy if I'm perfect, right? So they're like, what their framework does is it helps you identify like what's really going on under there. And until you can unravel that and prove to yourself that that is actually not true, it can be really hard to move forward on that progress. And so like what that has looked like for me is taking small risks, and you know, with these small safe experiments, so to speak, like learning that like, oh, actually, like even when I admit mistakes or I have a flaw or I do something intentionally that I know I'm not good at, I'm still accepted, right? And so as one example that I'll share is, you know, because I had in a strongly held identity that I'm a scientist, I didn't invest a lot in art. I was always best friends with brilliant artists growing up. But I stayed away from it. So I didn't practice. And you imagine, you don't practice something, you don't get better at it. So I'm not a great artist. But I enjoy it. I love coloring. I love drawing. And so I decided to push myself and take a pottery class. And I intentionally do not try to make beautiful pottery. I instead focus on like the sensation of playing with the clay. Like I allow myself to truly like play with it, like without attachment to, does it come out, is it going to come out to be a bowl or like a cup, you know, things like that. And I have made some of the most horrific pieces of pottery that you've ever seen. They're ugly, like you would never want them in your home. And yet I am so proud of these pieces because what they represent to me is really self-compassion, is that like I don't have to be perfect at it.
Beautiful. Thanks a lot for sharing that, Shonna. Thanks a lot for sharing that. I have two last questions for our conversation today. All right.
Great.
And the first question is about thinking. So my wife and I, we have been on the quest to help people to improve their ability to think, because we believe that if we can think well, then we can, it's all at the start of the whole beautiful change, right? And throughout your life, all this conversation, you mentioned about the word curiosity a lot. So you're really a curious person. I want to ask you this question: how have you been helping you to expand your ability to think so you can be curious and curious and curious over the years, though?
Yeah, that's great. Well, for me, I love diverse perspectives and ideas and domains. So one of the things I try to do that I think then in turn helps me think more rigorously and become more curious is expose myself to things I don't know anything about. And that was why actually consulting was really a good fit for me, because you know you have to become an expert in whatever the client wants or needs at any given moment. But for example, like I love to get newsletters where there's like sections on like random interesting things, or we have a Slack channel at work called Readful where like people will just post things and whatever they're reading. And you know, it's such a diverse group of employees and they're all over the world that there's things I would never stumble into myself. But what I find is that, again, like introducing myself to those new ideas, I start to see patterns. I start to like challenge assumptions underlying like the way that I was taught about something. Like one thing I've been doing, I had a sabbatical in August, and I went to Greece for that month, and I decided to just like read a lot of Buddhism and you know things like that, because I'm so, steeped on a day-to-day basis in Western culture. And I just was like, I want to challenge some of my core principles about like, what is a good life? What is happiness? What is, and I think that just like constantly introducing new ideas uh, to force you to really think about your thinking, and about your knowledge base, and like it allows you to get more rigorous about it.
Beautiful. Thanks a lot for sharing that. So I'll be open to diverse perspectives, right? And then keep reading, things that you don't know, keep doing things you don't know. So it kept expanding your world of intellectual and stuff. So thanks, Shonna, for sharing that. And the last question. So we knew the young version of Shonna, and then we know the journey that you've been taking on into what you are doing now, and that's a very amazing journey. So I want to say congratulations on all the big achievements that you've been having so far, and I believe that more will come. So, is there anything exciting you are working on and you want to share with me and the audience so that we can celebrate with you in advance?
Yeah, no, for sure. So what's next for me is high level. Like up until now in my career, I've really, I think the criterion that I've been focusing on is impact. Like how do I keep making a bigger impact, like helping more people, all of that. And in this next chapter, I'm shifting to fun. Now, for me, impact is fun, but like one of the primary characteristics there is like I want to work on things that are meaningful to me with people who I feel enriched and stimulated by, and who I can laugh with, right? So it's really like it's more about the feeling of the work that I'm doing and who I'm doing it with in this next chapter. And so I have some passion projects that are brimming around that, with respect to like the who and the what. But I think the other thing for me is that I'm also really interested in this concept of like, how do we make work better for people? I think, we've seen post-COVID, there's just this like kind of shift in the nature of the social contract and desire for increased flexibility and autonomy, and that's a problem set that I'm very attracted to. And so in some way, shape, or form, I'll keep exploring that as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. Shonna, I know that I asked you if I can have two last questions, but I do have one more.
You can have as many as you want.
I have one more for you, okay? And that is the question about the future. So you've been in the field to make impact, and then you want to go to the field, another one that having impact with fun, and that is the whole transformative, things inside of you. So I want to ask, what happened recently that made you to decide that you want to go into the next, to the future, doing something impactful with fun? Tell us for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think at some point it's just, you end up in this place where, and maybe it's midlife for me that's doing it, but you only have so many years left on the planet. And I started to ask myself, like, when am I happiest? When, what's that feeling? And how do I create more of that in my life? And during the pandemic, actually, or right just before, we had a third child. So I have a toddler in my household, and playing with her and just this lightness and just like laughter and like all of that, I was like, gosh, like that is what I want more of in my life. And like, how do I just increase that in every domain? So some of that is like more time and more intentional time with my family, but it's also like I can have those moments at, anywhere in my lived experience and days. I can have it when I go to the grocery store and like laugh with the person checking me out. And which then makes their day better as well. So I think it's probably just that midlife shift, reassessing values, what's important, like how to get more of matters and
Wow.
brings me joy.
Wow. Shonna, thanks a lot for sharing that because I'm the advocate for fun also. So I think that if when we do something with fun, then we always have the best energy we bring into that work, the people that we spend time with, and those moments will never replaceable by anything. So that's my philosophy for living for a very long time. I appreciate you sharing that with us, and you know what? There has been a wonderful conversation. It has been really, really beautiful to knowing you and having you in our circle. I really look forward to seeing you and your family in person one day. I'll invite you guys for dinner for a
Yes,
cup of coffee together, all right?
that would be wonderful. I can't wait to see you in Vietnam.
And then, Jonathan, thanks a lot for being so kind, so generous, spending your time joining our show and sharing your amazing journey with our audience. There's a lot of things in here that definitely I've learned from you, and our audiences will be having something to reflect on and to learn and to apply in their lives, and so that they can continue to grow and have an impact and fun.
Awesome. Well, it's been such a treat for me to meet you, and so inspiring to hear what you and your wife have done with this podcast and sharing the stories. So, thank you for the gift of knowing you.
Thank you very much. Please say hello to your family for us, and send our loves to all of them, our kisses to all of them. All right.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Bye bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye.